Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Brendan. I make recipes aimed at saving you both time and money. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make yogurt using only 2 ingredients. Yes, 2 ingredients. The first time I looked up how to make yogurt, I was honestly shocked at how simple it really is. You only need 2 ingredients, you just need a little bit of time and patience, and then you have really delicious yogurt at a fraction of the cost of what you could buy at the store, especially if you're making Greek yogurt, which I'll detail more in a bit. It can save you a lot of money, and again, it tastes a lot better. Amazingly, it's really not rocket science, though there's a little bit of science involved. Now, making yogurt does take a little bit of time. It's not something you can whip up in 30 minutes. However, the actual preparation of the yogurt is pretty quick. It's just the incubation that takes a while. So let's get started. For this recipe, you are going to need to use regular milk. In this case, I'm using whole milk. You can use reduced fat milk. However, I've seen better results with whole milk. It tends to hold together better and be a bit creamier. And then for your yogurt starter, you can either order that online. The easier way is to just go buy a small container of yogurt from the grocery store. You can use Greek or regular yogurt, but it does need to be plain, and it does need to contain live and active cultures. And so this yogurt contains, this yogurt contains Streptococcus thermophilus, Lactobacillus bulgaricus, Lactobacillus acidophilus, bifidus, and Lactobacillus casei. I don't know how you say that. But just to reiterate, the yogurt does need to contain live and active cultures for this to be successful. Some additional things that you will need for this are a large pot, a container to put the yogurt mixture in, something to stir and mix the yogurt mixture, but not a wooden spoon because that can harbor bacteria, and a thermometer to measure the temperature of the milk as we heat it and let it cool. All right, so first I'm going to add about 7.5 cups of whole milk, and that's just because that's about the size of the container that I'm using for my yogurt, so that's how much I'm going to add. You can make as much or as little as you want. You can scale this recipe up or down. Either way, it will work. I will go ahead and add in milk now. Okay, now I'm going to turn on the stovetop to medium heat. I'm just going to let this milk heat up to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to stir pretty frequently so that nothing gets burnt on or stuck to the bottom. Absolutely do not do this over high heat for a sustained period of time because you'll probably end up burning something on the bottom there, and that might end up being nasty. And I'm just using this thermometer to check the temperature of the milk as it warms up. While this is going, I'm going to cut on the fan to exhaust some of the air in this area. This is just to prevent any kind of contamination that may occur, especially after the milk is done heating up. Anything that falls in after that point could contaminate the mixture. And so I want to make sure that as much as I can control it, nothing gets in from the air. All right, the milk has reached a temperature of 180 degrees, and now I'm going to take it off of the burner and set it aside to let it cool down to 115 degrees Fahrenheit. And then I'm going to keep the vent running while this cools down, just again to prevent any dust or anything from falling into the pot and potentially contaminating the milk. And then we'll talk next steps. Okay, now that the milk has cooled down to 115 degrees, I'm going to go ahead and pour this into my glass container here. Okay, I've got it in this container. Ideally, I would have done this over the stove and under the vent to prevent as much contamination as possible. However, as you saw, that was really messy and I didn't want to pour that all over the stove. And so that's why I did it in the sink. Every time I pour from that pot, that's what happens. So that's why I did it over the sink. So now what I'm going to do is pop this back under the stove with the vent on, and then I will add in the yogurt. Okay, sorry for the vent noise. Hopefully the mic is not picking that up too much. And what I'm going to do now is carefully remove that lid. And then I'm just going to put 2 big heaping spoonfuls of this yogurt with, again, our live and active cultures into the pasteurized milk. And now I'm going to use my spoon that I was using to stir the milk and mix that in. To make sure that it's well mixed in there. And so the reason that we had to heat the milk up again was to kill anything that was potentially in that milk at the time. And then we had to let it cool down, and that's because had I poured that milk in there at 180 degrees Fahrenheit and then added that live and active culture, it would have just killed it, and that would have defeated the purpose. So that's the reason that you need to bring the temperature of the milk back down once you've killed off whatever's in there, and then you add in your live cultures. Now I'm just going to pop the lid back on, and I'm going to close it. And now we actually don't want to leave this on tightly. I'm going to unscrew it a few turns just so that it's a little bit loose. And so any gas that forms while this mixture is incubating can escape and the glass jar does not blow up. Okay, so this part's probably a little bit unorthodox. In order to get this milk to incubate and turn into yogurt a little bit more quickly, I'm going to stick this in this box. I have this heating pad in here. And so what I'm going to do is stick this milk in here, or our inoculated milk. I'm going to have it on like a low to medium temperature. And what this does is it keeps the environment warm so that the bacteria can do their thing a little bit more quickly. They're a little bit more comfortable at that temperature. And we should have yogurt after about 8 hours in this kind of setup. So that setup that I just have with the box and the heating pad and everything and the blanket, you don't actually have to have that set up. If you want to incubate your mixture on the counter overnight, that will work perfectly fine as well. So I'm just trying to get it to incubate within about 8 hours. But if you leave it on the counter at room temperature overnight or just throughout the day, you should get the same result within 12 to 24 hours. It's just going to, again, happen a little bit more slowly because the bacteria are not as active, quite as active at that temperature, but it will still work. So if that's what you need to do, then I say go for it. It will be fine. So you may be wondering what is happening during this incubation period. Basically, all that's happening is we've added in some yogurt with some live bacteria in them. That bacteria is going to multiply as the time goes by. And in the process, they're going to break down and ferment those lactose sugars that are present in that milk. And so when that happens, they produce lactic acid, which in turn makes the mixture more acidic, and then the proteins end up coagulating, and you end up with your thick and creamy yogurt. I just thought I'd throw that in there in case you were wondering. I always like to know what's kind of happening with food and any kind of like fermentation process or anything like that. I think it's really cool to know the science behind it. So there you have it. I will see you in about 8 hours, and we'll check on our yogurt. Oh, forgot to mention, when you're incubating the yogurt, make sure that it's covered, and again, that the lid is not on too tight so that any kind of gases that are forming can escape. All right, this is finished incubating. You can see that it's kind of solid now when I turn it to the side. You can see some lactic acid on top there. That's perfectly fine, just that yellowish liquid there. And I'm just looking around and I don't see any other discoloration, so it looks good. Now I'm just going to stick this in the fridge overnight. All right, the yogurt has been in the fridge overnight and also the rest of the next day because I had to go to work. But I pulled it out now, and now I'm going to go into the next step for making Greek yogurt. Before I do that, I just want to say that at this point, you can actually eat this and it'll just be regular yogurt. However, in order to get Greek yogurt, we're going to have to go through an additional step of straining it. And so what I've got here is kind of an odd setup. So basically what I've got is a couple of bowls. So one that's kind of a wider bowl and then one that's a little bit narrower. And then on top of that, I've got this colander, which I'm going to set inside of the smaller bowl. And so by doing this, I'm kind of creating some space And so when the liquid drains through, it'll be able to fill up in this bowl, but the contents of this will not be sitting in that. All right, and now I've got, you can use cheesecloth for this or paper towels. Honestly, for me, paper towels are easier. I do have cheesecloth, but it's honestly pretty hard to clean. So I don't want to deal with that, and I'm just going to use 2 paper towels. I've done this dozens of times, and it works really well. So I'm just going to pack those in there. And I'm putting 2 just so it's a bit stronger. So when I go to pull out the yogurt at the end, it doesn't tear. So now I'm just going to pop this open. Wow. And I'm going to kind of mix it up just to break it loose a little bit. Yeah, wow, that yogurt's really thick. This yogurt's so thick, it's just about Greek already. However, there's actually a lot of liquid in there that needs to come out. All right. Now I'm just going to pour this into the bowl, or the colander rather. All right, now that I've got all the yogurt in here, I'm just gonna let this sit in the fridge for about 5 to 8 hours. In the first few hours, quite a lot of liquid is probably going to drain out. And so what you're going to want to do if you do end up making the Greek yogurt is to check it about every hour or so, maybe even more frequently within the first couple of hours, because a lot of liquid is going to drain out of this. And if you have a similar kind of setup to me, then it may overflow the bowl and it'll stop draining out because it has nowhere to go. And so you just want to keep emptying that out. An additional option for the liquid that comes out is to save it. That liquid is actually whey and it contains a lot of protein. It's actually a good way to beef up the protein content of some other recipes that may call for water or broth. If you dump this in here, you'll be adding a lot of protein, but not many calories. But in this case, I'm just going to end up tossing that whey because I actually don't need it. And to be honest, I don't have a lot of room in my fridge for it. So now I'm just going to cover this and stick this in the fridge. I did just want to mention that when I initially incubated the yogurt, I did it for about 8 hours at a warm temperature. If you had done this on the counter, again, you could have done it between 12 and 24 hours. How long you incubate it for is really up to you. As long as you get that yogurt consistency, the longer that you leave it, the more tart it's going to be because the bacteria are going to ferment more of the sugars, there'll be less left, and there's going to be more lactic acid in the yogurt itself. I have found when I do it for about 8 hours at a warm temperature that it comes out at a good level for me. But by all means, experiment with that and see what works for you, what tastes best for you. At this point, a lot of you may want to just eat that yogurt, but personally, I really like Greek yogurt, and so that's what I'm going to make. It's currently in the fridge, and I'm going to leave it for between 5 to 8 hours, but really, again, it's not rocket science. You strain out as much liquid as you want and get it to the thickness that you want. Making Greek yogurt is super simple after you've already made the yogurt. And so this container had about 7.5 cups of milk in it when I initially did the incubation. That in turn made 7.5 cups of yogurt. I didn't lose any liquid or anything in the process. It was all contained within here. Now that it's going to strain out, typically from my experience, what I've ended up with is between half and a third of the original volume. So it's probably going to end up somewhere between 2.5 to 3.5 cups. It's not exact, and again, it depends on how much liquid you actually strain out of here. But if you go to make Greek yogurt, just keep that in mind that however much you make in the beginning, you're going to lose a lot of that in the straining process. So just make sure that you make enough to get the desired amount of Greek yogurt in the end. At this point, I was just jarring up the Greek yogurt. It had finished straining. I didn't speak in this portion because it was late at night and my girlfriend was asleep. I didn't want to be too loud and wake her up. All right, so I finished making the Greek yogurt and packing it into this jar. It strained for about 8 hours, and I just had to change the bowl out, I think, 3 or 4 times. It was really just the first couple of hours in which I had to change out the bowl frequently. In those first 2 hours, the whey was coming out quite quickly. So about every 30 minutes or so, I had to go in and change it. But then after that, I changed it like 1 or 2 more times. And then I actually ended up not changing it out for the next few hours. And then once I checked it after the 8 hour mark, it was good to go. I emptied it out and then put the yogurt in this jar here. And so I ended up with roughly a little over 3 cups of Greek yogurt in this jar. And so if you remember, I ended up making 7.5 cups of the regular yogurt. I did end up with a little bit less than half, which is what I expected. That tends to be what I get when I do the Greek yogurt. And so the nice thing about this is now that I have it, I can eat it and enjoy it, but I will also have a starter yogurt for when I want to go and make yogurt again. I can just take some of this yogurt and then start the process all over again and kind of do that in perpetuity until either the yogurt starts to taste bad or something kind of goes wrong with the process. But usually it does last quite a while and I don't really have to buy yogurt if I'm continually making my own. And now I'm going to give this a taste and let you know how it is. So I would just go ahead and scoop some out of here. And you can see that this is really creamy. Okay. Now I'm just going to add a little bit of agave. I like to use this to sweeten up the yogurt. There's no sugar in here, so it'll be quite sour if I ate it plain. I'm just going to add a little bit there. And now I'm going to add some of my homemade granola. If you'd like to see how to make your own granola, you can check out the video on the screen. In that video, I walk you through how to make this granola recipe, which I think is really good. All right, time to give this a taste. Just gonna mix it up a bit. Wow, that was really good. It's really creamy. The flavor is pretty mild. It's not too tart. Overall, 10 out of 10. If you'd like to prepare this yogurt recipe, it's going to be in the description below, both the regular yogurt and the Greek yogurt recipes and step-by-step directions. I mentioned a couple of times throughout the video that the timing isn't exactly rocket science and you can kind of play around with it to see what works best for you. That is mostly true. However, if you don't incubate the yogurt for long enough, it's not going to work. And then if you over incubate it, it's probably going to end up tasting pretty bad, pretty sour. It may even go bad at that point. And so I would suggest kind of sticking in reasonable time frames, but there is some flexibility there. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this, please be sure to like and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one.